Attention, please. Eastern Airlines Flight 19, now ready for departure.
Welcome aboard the Walt Disney World Express monorail. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we're entering the vacation kingdom of the world.
There's enough land here to hold all the ideas and plans we could possibly imagine. We call it Epcot. Will be our experimental prototype city of tomorrow.
Welcome to another episode of the Retro Disney World Podcast, taking you back to the vacation kingdom of the world, the way it was, and the way it is in your memories.
Welcome to another episode of the Retro Disney World Podcast, the official podcast of the Lake Buena Vista Historical Society. I'm your host, Todd McCartney, and this is episode 48.5, a chat with Jeff Blyth. So last month, we took you back to the Timekeeper in episode 48, and we hinted during that episode that we would bust some of the myths, expose some of the special effects, and the amazing work that Jeff did with the Circlevision 360 cameras and technology to make this film possible. So sit back, enjoy our chat with Jeff Blyth. All right, so on the phone with us is Jeff Blyth. He was one of the directors on Circlevision 360 films, including The Timekeeper. Jeff, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
So, Hal, you want to jump into some of Jeff's background and how he got into the directorial things over at Disney. So I'll let you have at it first. How's that?
I do, because I'm fast. You know, it's not like there's a whole bunch of Circlevision 360 like. There's not a lot of opportunities in the world to direct, that kind of a film. So I did a little bit of looking into your background, and I'm curious, how you managed to get there. I saw that you did some aerial work for The Shining, which is obviously a lot of people's very favorite movies. And I wondered if maybe that was kind of that type of experience is what got you in there, because you did a lot of work with helicopter shots and some gorgeous photography for that movie. So, I'm just going to ask you: was that sort of the thing that got you in there, or how did you go from beginning to becoming the director for Circlevision films?
Sure. Well, I worked for a company in Laguna Beach, California, at the time when we did the aerial work for The Shining. And it was a company that did a lot of, they got started doing surf movies. The company was called, is still called, McGillivray-Freeman Films. They're mostly IMAX film producers now. And in fact, the first film I did for them was To Fly, which was for the Air and Space Museum.
Oh, yeah.
In Washington. It was the premiere film when the Air and Space Museum opened in 1976. And in fact, that film was supposed to be there for just the first year because it was a bicentennial film, and it's still there. It plays like once a day, but they can't get rid of it. It will outlast me.
It's a classic at
this
point, yeah.
It is. And so I was working for McGillivray-Freeman. We got a call for Epcot, and it was to do a film in China. And at the time, I was doing, as you said, helicopter shots and things. I got asked by Greg McGillivray to direct the film Wonders of China for Epcot, and went off and did that film for Disney. And then, and that was my first Circlevision movie. Knew nothing about it. Went to Disneyland, watched the old America the Beautiful.
Yep.
A half a dozen times in a row, just to. It was one of those things that it was like, try to figure out what this system is by virtue of looking at finished footage. And in the course of that, I kind of had it figured out by just watching the film so many times. And there was one shot in that old film of America the Beautiful that was taken from the roof of a car when there were a bunch of cattle all around. It was like a roundup, and it was shot at sunrise or sunset, And I had learned enough from just watching this thing. It was like, wait a minute, if the sun is in the shot, that means if I turn around and look 180 degrees away, I will see the shadow of the camera. And there it was. And it's sort of like, okay, now I get it. Now I see how this thing works. That was my first Circlevision lesson. And as I went off to do the China film, I learned a lot about it by virtue of it's an incredibly unique system, shooting 360 degrees. And while the Chinese were in those days, this was 1981, 82, when making that film, they were really paranoid about the idea that this is a camera that looks in all directions. Well, it doesn't see everything. Yes, it does see in 360 degrees, but it's only 30 degrees vertical. It's 360 all around, but it's this narrow band. And so they were nervous about, well, you can't film in that province because there's an army base there, or you can't film in this location because it's around the mountain from an army base or whatever. And so it was, making that film was an enormous challenge. On the one hand, for me, just learning the system and how to make movies in 360 degrees, but trying to do it in China was doubly or triply difficult, just by virtue of their, not understanding what the system was.
Right. And I understand you used a local crew for that too. You didn't bring like a whole bunch of people with you from America that had familiarity with the system, right?
We had a very, very small crew.
Okay.
Greg came over for a while, Greg McGillivray, but he left after a while, and it was me, an American camera technician who kept the cameras running, and an American grip, and a location manager.
Okay.
So that was it. And the rest was a Chinese crew.
Right. Wow.
That was a huge, an enormous learning experience for me. It was it was a major event in my life to make that film. And Wonders of China, played for over 20 years in one theater, and over 100 million people saw it.
Amazing.
In one theater.
I loved that movie. My first Epcot experience was 1983, and I know Todd's was very shortly. Actually, yours was first 82, right, Todd? Or
86.
86. Okay.
86.
So I saw that movie. I loved that movie, and at the time, you can tell us more than better than I can. But like, there were so many things in that movie that Western eyes had never seen before, like that.
Oh, absolutely. And it was in a kind of a shorthand way. What I realized the system was about was that, I would go off on these location scouts to look at things. And what it really came down to was I realized that where I was standing when I was saying, yeah, this would be a great place for a Circlevision shot. What I realized I was talking about really was, is this precise location a place that I'd want to bring millions of people to witness this? That's what I felt as my responsibility was. They're going to stand here with me. I'm going to bring audiences to see this, whether it's Mongolian horsemen riding around the camera, or floating down the Lee River, or any of those kinds of things. That was my criteria for trying to figure out what might make a great shot. And so it was a great privilege to me many, many years later, 20 years later, to go back and make the new film that's there, Reflections of China.
So, Jeff, I have a couple questions regarding the Circlevision 360 rig, and I've seen in clips of making of and all these types of things that the cameras are on the bottom on sometimes they're up on the top. How many different types of configurations, and was that 35 or 70 millimeter? What can you tell us about how that was all designed?
Those were 9 35 millimeter cameras.
Mm-hmm.
And at the time that I made Wonders of China, there was, they had really only made America the Beautiful,
right,
previous to this. And so, I was given by Disney a list that said, okay, you're going to make a Circlevision movie. Here are the rules. you will only shoot between 10 o'clock and 2 o'clock because that's when the sun is kind of up overhead. So those shadows, like I saw in America the Beautiful, are not going to get in the shot.
Yep.
But between 10 and 12, or between 10 and 2 is like, yeah, that's also the worst possible lighting of the day. Like, okay, yeah, but that's when you do this. And when they made America the Beautiful, they had a rig for this camera that was in a station wagon. And it was on hydraulics, on a hydraulic lift. They would push a button, the roof would open, they'd push another button, the hydraulics would lift the camera up to above the car, and that was what you wouldn't see the car, but you'd see whatever the scene was. And they would be driving towards something. And so when they made this movie, when they made America the Beautiful, the original, they literally didn't have any idea how to edit it. So what they did was they said, well, take camera number 1 of the 9 cameras. Take number 1, because that's the one that's aimed at the front of the car, that's pointing straight to wherever we're going.
Right.
And just edit that one. I know the editor that worked on that original film. And he said, oh, yeah, I just cut the one film. And when I got it to the point where he said, Walt Disney said, yeah, looks good. That's nice movie.
Right.
Then they got these editors to go in and cut the other 8 pictures to match.
Wow. So you had to count exactly to the right frame, because one frame off, and you do that a couple times, and all of a sudden,
oh yeah,
you're way off at those played at 24 frames per second, right? Is that?
Yes.
Yeah.
24 frames per second, regular 35 millimeter film.
Yep.
And it was, and what that meant was that basically nobody had really checked out those other 8 screens to make sure that there weren't objectionable kinds of things in them.
Right.
And when you watch that, if you ever get a chance to see that movie again, ignore camera 1, because that's like a normal movie the way it's edited. You watch the sides and everything, and you'll see people as the camera's driving down the street. You'll see people, just pedestrians, looking at this ridiculous rig and pointing at it, and you could literally read lips like, what the hell is that? Anyway, but those were the kind of rules that I had. And so when I went out to make the China film, the thing that was critical to me was, well, you may think those are the rules, but we're going to push the medium. It's never been pushed, so I'm going to try other things, like breaking it up into 9 separate images. Or I did a shot in Tibet where it's a 360 shot and you can see the Potala Palace, but then camera number 1 starts to zoom in towards the panel. And, stuff like that had never been seen before in a 360 film. And so we did a lot of things. And in fact, in that first film, when people look at it, there's a shot that we did originally in Tibet, and there's this big horse cart full of straw and kids on it, and it's going by.
Oh, yeah, I remember that one.
It was a shot where I had told the camera tech, I said, loosen all the bolts that are holding this thing down. He said, what are you going to do? And I said, I want to try something. And as this thing sort of rumbled past the camera, I grabbed onto the rig and twisted it. I just turned it to follow the horse cart going by. And so, in effect, I was panning a 360-degree camera. Now, if you were to ask any of the technicians who supposedly knew all about Circlevision, it'd be like, well, why would you pan something? There's no reason to pan. It's a 360 shot. Wherever it is, if it goes by, we're going to see it anyway.
Really kind of had this very, just lack of better term, forward-thinking mentality of making the film rather than utilizing the medium in a different way that you were doing.
Exactly.
Just roll it. Just run with it as is.
And so, throughout the course of 9 different Circlevision productions that I ended up doing, each time out, it was like, okay, you did that the last time, now you're going to do something new. You're going to find some, I did a show for Expo 86 called Portraits of Canada, and that was all done with actors and dialogue, and we were telling stories, and that had never been done before.
So there's a good thing to clear up. So we always hear about how Timekeeper was the first, I should say from time to time, was the first movie, the first Circlevision that had a story to it, but that's not true. You did
Definitely
other ones
not.
for other venues. Aha.
Interesting.
Yep.
So it's the first Disney one to have a story, really.
Well, that's true, except that, in this particular case, the film for Expo 86 was, Disney had done a film in 1967 for Expo 67, and they did it for Bell Canada, the phone company in Canada. They hired Disney and said, hey, we want a film for this pavilion, and so they did this film, and it was fine. All these years later, the phone company in Canada, it was Telecom Canada at that point, they came to Disney and said, hey, we'd like to do another film, a 360 film for, the Expo. And Disney suggested me because I was born in Canada. So, put together this thing and came up with this notion of 12 little short stories, all done with actors from various walks of life in Canada. There's a cowboy going to the Calgary Stampede. There's a woman who's in the Corps de Ballet in the National Ballet of Canada, a Newfoundland fishing family, an Inuit hunter up in the Arctic, and stuff like that. And they're each little short stories. But the idea was that all of them were sort of needed to be seen together to create a singular portrait of Canada. That's why it was Portraits of Canada.
Gotcha. Real quick question too, Jeff, just out of curiosity, on your IMDb page too, it says you're uncredited for American Journeys. Is that true, or is that an error? Because you were talking about America the Beautiful earlier as your first, the one that you watched.
Well, the funny thing with Disney is nobody gets credit for the films that show up in the theme parks.
Yeah,
they don't do it, and so it was funny because I had always had in my contracts with Disney what's called a most favored nations clause. And basically what I said was, I understand nobody gets credit. However, if anybody gets credit, here's how my credit will be. Right. and they'd go, yeah, we can put that in your contract. I mean, what difference does it make? Nobody's getting credit. And it's like, that's fine. And so that was always in my credit or my contracts. Well, as it turned out, the Canadian film, the Portraits of Canada for Expo 86, they said, well, we want to run credits, and we ran credits in 1967, so we want to run credits for this film. So Portraits of Canada was the first time I actually got my name on the screen for a 360-degree movie.
Wow!
It's the only one that had credits, lots of credits.
That's interesting.
For all the people in the various capacities. But in terms of answering your question about American Journeys, it was an interesting story. What had happened was one of the other guys who is also very well known for making Circlevision films, Rick Harper, and Rick had done Impressions of France at Epcot, and he had been asked to do the update of America the Beautiful, which was going to be called American Journeys. And he set off to start making this film, and he got partway into it and called me and just said, oh my God, this is so huge. Would you come and start up a second unit? I'll just tear the script in half, and you take some and I'll take some, and we'll just go off and shoot this. So we were doing this. We had two separate Circlevision units that were shooting shots for American Journeys. Partway through production, one of the executives from Disney, Randy Bright, wonderful guy who had produced all the films for Epcot. Randy was our contact guy, and he came up with this crazy idea. I'm being polite. He came up with this crazy idea for, wait a minute, stop shooting. Here's my new idea for American Journeys. It was somewhat crazy because he was trying to take shots that we had already done and sort of call them something else. It's like, yes, I know you shot this to be used in a certain way, but imagine it's used a different way. And he had sort of restructured the whole thing. And Rick Harper was so distraught by this notion that he left the show.
Oh, wow.
And that left me as the only other director on the film. And I wanted very much to try to protect what Rick had done. So I took Randy Bright's notion and I kind of revised it and simplified it and added a few new shots and basically said, how about this? And Randy said, yeah, sure, that'll work. So I went off and finished the film. And I ended up technically with the credit for writing that particular film, because I did write all the narration that went in there as well.
Oh, great.
But in terms of uncredited, yeah, but we're all uncredited.
That's really neat. So that's an interesting story.
So I actually went and shot like all 6 screens of American Journeys or 9 screens, sorry, of American Journeys one day, like on the last day that it was open, to get as much of it as possible. I got to actually watch like all of the screens the entire way through.
How I was going to say, you shot only 6 screens. What was that? Was like, was that Circlevision 240? Is that what you were doing?
Yeah, that was a really good one too. I love that. Was another.
It was a wonderful
movie.
film,
Yeah.
and had a great score by Basil Polidoris, who's no longer with us. And I really enjoyed working on that film, and it was funny. Rick Harper and I had an opportunity many years after that to go down to Disneyland. What happens is there's Disneyland is really the only place you can screen these films in 360 degrees. The studio does not have a facility. It's like if you've got, a rough edit of a new film, the only place to see it is to go down to Disneyland before the park opens, and you put your film on and you can watch it in 360 degrees. So Rick and I had gone down there for something else, and the people who ran the pavilion said, "Oh, you guys made American Journeys." And we go, "Oh, yeah." And they said, "Oh, well, you should take our test." And we said, "Your test? What's your test?" And they said, "Well, because we work in the pavilion, we see this film hundreds and hundreds of times. And, well, when you make the film, you see it hundreds and hundreds of times." And they said, "Well, then you shouldn't have any trouble with our tests." And it was a test that these guys had printed up, like a 3-page test that they give to new employees. And they basically say, "Okay, see how many of these you can answer." And so Rick and I are thinking, well, we should ace this test, right? And it was unbelievable how many things that they called out that were in our film that we had literally seen hundreds and hundreds of times. And it was like, "Oh, you're kidding. This isn't." And they go, No, that's in there. It's on screen 7 at this moment. And it was like, what?
Wow. Were these things that you missed out of edits, bloopers, so to speak, all those different types of things?
Yes.
Wow.
Yes.
Never underestimate somebody with nothing going on in their life. You just sit there at your job, and that's I understand totally. I worked at a movie theater, so I get that.
Yeah, and the thing is that when you make these films, when you're editing them, you are literally editing. Unlike the old days with America the Beautiful, where they only cut one picture, with screen number 1, we're editing all 9 screens simultaneously. We have 3 flat editors that are all linked together, and each one has 3 screens. So you've got all 9 screens around you, and we edit based on being able to see everything. And yet, when these people saw the film, over and over and over again, they were seeing things we had never seen.
Jeff, did you guys ever get a perfect shot? Everything seemed fine, and one of the 9 weren't recording, like something happened, a jam.
Well, one of this was you're bringing up an interesting point, because this is a really now an archaic system.
Yeah.
You've got 9 cameras that are all trying to run 35 millimeter film through the gate without scratching. And when I did Wonders of China, I took on a camera technician who I was told by a number of people, he's not a nice person, but he's a fanatic about making sure nothing gets scratched. Because essentially what would happen is in those days, this is all pre-computers, if you had, a scratch on screen 3 or screen 8 or whatever, it was like it ruined the entire take.
Oh.
If you were doing helicopter shots and you got a bug that landed on the mirror of one of the cameras, It was all a bad take. You couldn't say, yeah, but we were great for 8/9 of the screen. No, you would lose it all. There was no fixing it, and there was nothing you could do about saying, well, can't we use that part from earlier or from another take? No. It had to be all of those screens simultaneously. And so we got into this thing of when we would look at dailies on location where we couldn't see it 360 degrees. We'd have to see it one screen at a time. We would look at, let's say you did 5 takes. We would look at camera 1, take 1, take 2, take 3, take 4, take 5. Then we'd look at camera 2, take 1, take 2, and like that. And we would make notes as to whether there was anything bad, like, oh, take 3 on camera 1 was no good because of a scratch or something. But if all of the scenes were good, all the cameras were good on take 4, that became the one you used in the film. You would have to eliminate any take that had something bad in it. You could only use takes that had all good footage in 9 cameras.
Oh my gosh! So how long did that process take to get a good solid sequence? You'd be hours just going to.
Yes, absolutely. And one of the while I put up with this camera technician in China, and he came as advertised, but I never lost a frame of film in China.
Wow.
Everything I shot, it came out without a scratch, no dirt, nothing.
Wow.
And so it was worth it to me to put up with him as a person because he just was fanatic about making sure everything was good. And I ended up using him on 5 more films.
Wow.
Yeah.
Now, Jeff, when you were in the editing bay, you're editing a print, obviously. How was that then translated when you did the final? Did you have additional editors that go back out and actually select the final print and do the final edit to make the copies?
What we would do is when the film would get processed, and processing of Circlevision, that's a whole other podcast about of what you have to do. I mean,
we're ready when you are, Jeff. Trust me.
Okay, well, I'll give you the short version.
Sure.
Basically, we would buy film from Kodak it all had to be the exact same batch number, meaning exact same chemistry on all 9 screens at the same time.
Right.
And then when it would go to the laboratory, we would never allow a laboratory to process, one of our rolls and then, a little bit later, another one of our rolls. It's like, no, we don't care if we have to wait till morning. You're going to run all of our film through the same chemicals at exactly the same time because these chemicals change over time, even within a day. And so you really were fanatic about trying to make everything have the exact same outcome. When you would make a print, you would use the same process you would want every camera printing on the exact same printer lights with the exact same stock.
Yeah.
And then that stock would get processed all the same. And it was to prevent you having a scene come up and you go, camera 3's a little magenta.
Yeah.
Right.
No, that didn't happen. It was everything got processed, everything got matched all the way through the process. Well, when we would shoot something, it would come back to Disney and we would have the negative department go through every foot of film and they would imprint numbers, a code number in the margins of the film between the sprockets.
Right.
And that would go on everything and it would go on a print so that when we were working with the print, we could then edit that and know when we were done, they would be able to take that and match it to the negative.
Right.
Precise negative. And the coding had, like 1AA00001.
Right.
2A00001, like that. So you could look at it and know immediately which camera it came from.
And then we should let people know too. I mean, we do film restorations here where we restore 8mm and 16mm films. But when you're saying editing, you are cutting it down to the specific frame. You're smoothing out the edge. You're putting an adhesive together to put that frame back, that film back together, and then looking at your work and say, oh no, you know what, we need to cut another frame out. So you make 2 cuts and splice it back together. This is tedious, long hours. This is not your iPhone slider, well, let me just cut these 3 seconds out. This, I think we've restored some personal films before where people have done some amazing editing on their home 16 millimeter. And I can only imagine doing this 9 times over.
So far this semester, he has been absent 9 times.
9 times?
9 times.
Just coming to a conclusion with an editor about where to make a cut, where the scene is over, and then marking all 9 frames and making sure that those all match for their code numbers, before you can cut that and then go on to the next scene. And then you've got to do all the splicing. You would have assistant editors that would help with that kind of work.
How many years was your editor institutionalized after this?
I was going to ask if you're an organized person. That has to be so mentally.
You really need somebody who is that way about it. You want somebody creative, but at the same time, the nature of these shows, particularly the Timekeeper, where absolutely that movie was cut to the frame to match a show that was going on in the theater.
Right.
There was no flexibility where you'd say, no, I'd just like to hang on that shot for an extra second or something. It was like, no. When I was making that particular film, I carried a computer with me and I had a spreadsheet. And every time I would shoot a scene, I would try to figure out, well, what is the, I had a target time that said, according to my numbers, this has to be a 27-second scene. And so if it worked out to 26, I had 1 more second that I could apply somewhere else.
Oh my God.
But if it was 28 seconds, I had to take 1 second from someplace else because it was very, very precise because of the nature of tying into a theatrical presentation in the theater.
Right.
With robots.
And that's one of the biggest leaps forward, I think. When Circlevision really was your first virtual reality, as you point out, American Journeys and America the Beautiful, it was just vistas. And this was Disney's first foray into taking a movie, interacting it with the audience, not so much with the audience, but interacting it with something physical in the room and timing it. And that's really, really neat. I could talk for hours about film because I'm just always astonished by film. I grew up, my father was a cinematographer, so I grew up around it, so I could go for hours. But I want to talk a little bit about the Timekeeper here and some logistics, and then go through some of the scenes. So Hal and I were having a discussion. Obviously the Le Visionarium was the first incarnation of the attraction to go live in in 92 when Disneyland Paris opened. What we're interested in knowing is that was there dubbing going on? Did you actually film it twice with the English version, knowing that was coming up, and then a French version, or was it really good dub work? Because I tried to watch some of the French versions, and we were unsure. And I honestly didn't set up 2 YouTubes side by side and go frame by frame, and it's a little hard over a muddied screen.
I'll give you the answer.
Sure.
I double shot the film, French and English.
Wow. So it was done. So everybody was. They were all bilingual.
Everybody had to do both.
Wow.
Wait, so that means you did the 9-time thing twice, editing, the cutting, everything we just talked about one more time?
Absolutely.
Oh my God.
You'd have to have an English version of it, and you'd have to have a French version of it.
Because the markers are all different, because when he says action, it's rolling at a different time frame. So the number of frames he shoots on scene 1 is going to different when he does. So if you had the actors set up for the scene, and what I'm thinking in my head is when you first see Jules Verne and H.G. Wells. So did you first do it in French and know that you got the shot and then immediately reset with, obviously, hopefully everybody's still in costume and maybe have to do a powder touch up or something like that, and then just say, okay, English on, let's go for it? Or how did that work?
Oh, you're so deluded.
That's why you're on the show.
We're not in the biz, man. We don't know how this stuff works.
We just report on this stuff.
To think that there would be any kind of an immediate reset. I mean, we were sometimes lucky to get 2 and 3 takes in a day.
Wow.
On a, and basically when we were doing the expo, which was, about as complicated as anything in the film. Although, to be perfectly honest, the Mozart scene was the most difficult.
Yeah, we've got questions on that one for sure.
Yeah, but it was, the idea of saying, "Hey, everybody, back to one. Let's do this again." In the case of Expo, we had 350 extras in costume with horses and carts and horseless carriages, and the idea that even if the weather weren't fighting us, just getting everybody back to their first positions was probably a half an hour.
Oh my God.
And more than likely, much longer than that. One of the problems with that particular shot was right from the start, it was 4.5 pages of dialogue. Well, the normal Circlevision cameras have 400-foot loads, which means you can't shoot a 4.5-page dialogue scene in Circlevision.
I'm sitting here trying to do the math at 24 frames a second, 400 feet. Like, what do you get?
Yeah.
Well, when you do the math, think 30 frames per second.
Okay. That's right.
But here's the thing: we realized very early on we were going to need to be able to use 1,000-foot magazines on our cameras in order to be able to have 4.5-minute takes and not be changing film all the time. When we were on the China film, my first Circlevision, if you needed to change film, you were basically down for an hour because you had a camera tech who was fanatic about these things, and it was like, okay, you take camera 1 off and unload that film and download that film and mark that film and put it in a can and now put in new film into camera 1 and so forth. And you multiply that out, as fast as he could work, it was still a minimum 45 minutes, but really more like an hour to get the camera reloaded. So for the Circlevision at the Expo, we put 1,000-foot camera magazines on the Circlevision rig, which sounds like an easy solution. Except when you put 1,000-foot magazines on these camera, they're in the shot.
Oh.
The magazines are so big, they stick up into the shot. And so we had to modify all 9 cameras to tip them back so that the magazines would not be in the shot.
Oh, wow.
That was like an easy fix compared to some of the other things that we had to do.
Right.
In that Expo shot, I wanted the camera to make a kind of impossible Circlevision move, which was to fly up over a poster that had kind of like goalposts, and we'd fly between them and come down the other side, so that I wanted people who knew film to freak out when they saw that. Like, wait a minute, that's not possible.
But I thought 9i could fly. I thought 9i could fly.
Well, you wanted to fly, you expected to do that. And what we did in this particular case was we had built a full-size construction crane like you'd see on a building. We built that on the location and then built a 3-sided facade that went around the base of that up to 50 or 60 feet. And so it was hidden from camera.
Wow.
There was a building there. Well, it wasn't really a building. It was just the hiding of the crane.
The crane.
And so we had way up on top a crane operator that could pick up the camera and move it and, do all of those kinds of moves for that 4.5 minutes.
So it was actually suspended from the top. That's amazing.
Correct.
Yeah.
You always think it's a boom or something like that, but no, it would be
hanging.
Yeah.
Yeah. One of the things I really like about it is you got really aggressive with moving the camera, which generally was not done up until that point. So there's so many things in the film where you're like, oh, right, this is so cool that you did this.
That was part of the directive, going back to the pre-China days about here are the rules. You will not move the camera. Don't do that. And so the idea of just putting it on a dolly was like, oh, okay, you can do that. The problem with a dolly could only be about 12 feet long, because when the camera went to one end or the other, if it went further than that, you'd start to see the dolly track in the shot, either at one end or the other.
Right, right.
So 12 feet was about the most you could make of a camera move. But we maximized that when we were making the early films. And so because we were on a crane for that expo shot, we no longer had that limitation. We weren't on a dolly.
That's awesome.
We did a scene for Mozart where we filmed at a place called Chantilly. We had thought about doing it at Versailles, and this place was just worked out as really great for us. But the camera move was going to be longer than 12 feet to get from one room down a hall and into a third room.
Mm-hmm.
And so what we did in that particular case was the floor was very uneven. It was one of these parquet floors. You know, you can't afford to have one of these in your home. They're so beautiful, the inlaid
It's like
wood
100 years old too.
Well, except it's more like 300 years old, and so it's warped, and it's like being on the ocean when you try to do a dolly shot. It was just way too uneven, and so what we did for that one shot was we built a new floor for the camera and made it look like parquet, and it had to blend in with the other parquet so that when you were down at one end of the shot or the other, you couldn't see that there was a unique floor that we had put in.
Nice.
Wow. I was almost thinking that you had people running around from side to side, like building a pyramid, where they're running the rollers from one side of the sled to the other.
Yeah.
Going back to what you said earlier, Jeff, too, about, and Hal mentioned how you panned and tilted the camera, I think our listeners have to understand, too, that you were replicating a character at that point. We were in Nine Eye, right? So the panning motion of looking down and looking up and tilting, and when you had her fly behind.
It was supposed to be Nine Eye.
Exactly. So she flew behind the Formula One car. And, it was tilted down as if she was, moving forward with speed. Mm-hmm. And I think that was brilliant. And that really. And you kind of gave it a little bit of a bounce effect too, like she was hovering and moving, and it really gave that sensation of that, you were, those were her eyes.
And for that shot on the Formula One track, that was it. There weren't any easy shots. There was not one single shot in this movie that was easy. And for that one, we hired a guy by the name of Remy Julien, who was one of my idols. This is a guy who was like the premier stunt driver in all of Europe. Go watch the original, the Italian Job. That's Remy Julien doing all the driving, and his sons and all of his stunt drivers. And he did the stunt for us with the cars where at the Arc de Triomphe where Jules Verne steps out into traffic and all the cars are going nuts trying to avoid him. And so he did the shot at this racetrack, which was in Germany. And what Remy Julien did was he built a one-off camera rig that was, picture a go-kart where the guy that's driving it is way off to one side and he's lying flat on his back, and he's got this tiny little steering wheel, and he's basically looking through his feet. Right? And next to him is this massive Circlevision rig. And oh, by the way, we need it to go 100 miles an hour. And oh, by the way, we need you to be going the wrong way on a Formula One track, trying to catch up with Jules Verne, who's going the wrong way, with Formula One cars going left and right around him.
Jeff, I've got a name for this. If you didn't have a name for this sled, I think you should call it Cineluge. It's like a luger.
Well, we also built a special bobsled for that rig going down a bobsled run.
So that you really, that one there, you're trusting in the driver there, right? Was there anybody on from the team as well?
Well, when we did that shot, I went to this bobsled track, and I insisted. I said, I've got to go down the track. I got to see what it's like. Months from now, I'm going to be in a sound mix, and people are going to have edited this thing, and they're going to say, is that what it sounds like? And I'm going to have to say, no, it's more this, not whatever. And so I took a run with this team down the bobsled for research purposes. and they had said, now whatever you do, don't look up. I was like the number 3 position. The guy behind me is the brakeman, so I'm not going to take that position. So I'm a passenger, and they said, don't look up. Well, come on, I'm going to look up.
Yeah, you have to.
And you get to you go through the first turn, and it's like, this isn't so bad. This is okay. We're kind of we kind of swung up to the left there, and now we're picking up a little speed. We go down the next turn, and whoa, we kind of sweep up a little higher on that one, and then by about the time you get to the 5th curve, you're not breathing, and you do not realize it until you hit like curve 20, and you finally come to the end of it, and you're not breathing. It was spectacular.
That's
so
crazy.
It's like, oh my God, okay, don't need to do that ever again, but thank you. And then what we had them do was build a bobsled that would be big enough that it would stick out where you could see it. In other words, if you put the camera on a normal bobsled, you'd never see it. You wouldn't see anything because it's below that 30 degrees that the camera sees. So it needed to be extended out. So this thing was really long. I mean, it was almost like 10 feet long, but it was so that we could see at least the front and the driver there. And of course, we're going to see the guy in back, who's the brakeman, and then right in front of us is the stunt guy who's supposedly Jules Verne, who got jumped there from the car, the Formula One track. And so we had that set up, and these guys did a lot of testing. They built in fact, we built a rig for them that had the correct weight of a Circlevision camera and shipped that to them, and they sort of built the sled around it.
Wow.
So that they could be testing it, because it would, everything would be wrong. The weight would be wrong, the height would be wrong, but it needed to go down the track and not destroy itself or kill somebody. Right. And so they worked with that for months just for this one shot. And when they finally got the camera and we went there to shoot it, so I said that was in Austria. And when we did that, we shot that in 1991, February of 91. We shot the bobsled run, and it worked great. Something about the filming of this particular movie that you should be aware of. It was costing us close to $1 million a shot. Wow. And we had 14 shots for this movie that we had to put together. Because it was costing so much, and you have to make sure, did you get it? And when I say did you get it, it's not just am I happy as the director saying, yeah, I got everything happened in front of the camera that I wanted. It's like, no, did you get it? Meaning nothing is scratched. There's no problems with the film or the camera. And so what we would do is, and this happened throughout this entire production, we would go to Technicolor in England, no matter where we were filming, whether it was in Italy or Russia or wherever we were shooting for this film. We would have the footage we would shoot for a day. Footage would be overnighted to Technicolor London. They would do our special process and inspect the film immediately the next morning for scratches. Well, because we wouldn't know until the next morning, everything in the film was shot 2 days at a time, meaning we'd shoot on a Tuesday, ship the film for processing. Because we wouldn't know until late morning on Wednesday, we were also shooting Wednesday. Wow. In other words, we shot everything on 2 days with the idea that if we got word on Wednesday, everything from Tuesday was great, no problems, well, then we knew we had the shot and we could stop filming. But if there was a problem, well, we were shooting on Wednesday and we would send that film in as well.
Right.
So we did this on every single shot. We would shoot at least 2 days.
Yeah, so you had to be set up every single day for a reshoot until you knew that you didn't have to reshoot.
Correct. And when we did the expo, it was actually almost a week of shooting.
Wow, all those extras and everything.
And there was 4.5 pages for the introductory scene. There was the scene when you come back at the end of the film, and Jules Verne meets up with H.G. Wells and and all of that.
Oh yeah,
and you had the 1990s portion of it too. Yeah,
correct.
I think people don't understand that, in today's production world, even if you are shooting on film, which, there's still some directors and people who choose to do that versus digital, but there's always a digital camera on top, and they can review what was in frame, and they can quickly go back and see if they've captured it. I think what you explained there, Jeff, just shows the length and the complexity of this film, and how challenging it was. And obviously the production value of it is incredible, but it boggles my mind. You just never think about this type of stuff.
Right. When we did Mozart, we were basically set up for the better part of a week. I mean, it took days to get set up for the filming, and then a couple of days of shooting. It was easily the most complex shot I've ever done, and I'll give you a sample of an example of how that complexity multiplies. When we were shooting a film like China, again, I'm going back to the old time Disney guys handing me the list that says, "Here you go, kid. Here's how you make a Circlevision movie." And in those days, the lenses were very special lenses. There were 32 millimeter Cook lenses that had no focusing on them, none. And what that meant was they were preset for 50 feet, perfect for landscapes.
Yeah.
Because that's what they figured this system was, that's all it was going to be, was for landscapes. So if you said, yeah, but hang on a second, I got this Chinese poet and I want him to come close to camera and I want him to be, 6 feet away, how do I get him in focus? Well, the way you do that is that lens has to be taken off the camera, and you insert this really thin sliver of brass. It's a ring, and it's we're talking about something in that you'd have to measure in a micrometer, like 0.019 inches thick. And if you put that in between the lens and the camera, suddenly that focus is not at 50 feet anymore. It's at 8 feet or whatever. Well, you're not going to do that in the middle of a shot.
Right.
You're going to do that as you're setting up for the shot. And so I had this list. I didn't even know it existed, but the camera tech told me. He says, "Oh, yeah, I've got this list, and I carry all these little shims, these things that we can put in if you need them." And it was like, "Oh, yeah, I need them. We're going to be using them." And so, I would say, well, all right, camera number 1 is going to be set to infinity, and camera number 2 is going to be set to 50 feet, and camera number 3 has to be set to 10 feet, and so on. I would figure out, based on the scene, what the focus was on these individual cameras.
Oh my gosh! And then you'd set up all your blocking around that for the actors. Oh my god! Oh,
absolutely.
Right, because at least in this situation, you were predictable. It wasn't like when you were doing anything in China where you didn't know what the crowd around you would do. That was even worse. But here, at least you could control.
In China, everything you saw was controlled.
Oh, really?
This was the secret to making that film in China, was that we would go to some place like the Great Wall, and you'd see, crowds teeming.
Yeah.
And every one of those people you saw were paid extras.
Scratch that. I should have just said the Canadian film then.
There you go. But they weren't looking at camera. And that was the key to it, was if we had tried to shoot anywhere in China without total crowd control, all you would have seen were Chinese faces, staring at the camera.
Right.
And so we would go to some place like the Great Wall, and we'd say, between this tower and that tower, clear it of all people. We've got buses of people that we're going to put in there, and they're all going to be our people, and they're all going to be instructed to go about their business and not look at camera.
Oh, wow.
And so you would go to enormous lengths to make it look natural.
Yeah. It reminds me of the Truman Show. All right, put the people in.
That's right.
Exactly.
First positions, everybody.
Yeah.
Yep, exactly. So, we were used to doing this from day one on the China film. That was my way of working, was I'm not going to grab any shots. And so even a thing like we had a scene in that first film of going down a Beijing street with all these bicyclists around us. Well, they're not looking at us. They're not looking at camera. Why? Because I hired 20 bicyclists, and they're surrounding the camera car. And as we're driving, I'm telling them, "Don't look at camera. Don't look at camera." And so what we would find, I mean, part of it's a psychology. As they go down the road, other bicyclists are nearby, and they're going, "Oh, I guess we're not looking at camera." And so you get this natural-looking scene, but it's very unnatural how you go about getting it. And, that's just filmmaking.
Wow.
So I know Hal I have a list of a couple questions regarding Timekeeper.
Sure.
But I know Hal's got one since we were talking about Mozart just a few moments ago.
I have two questions around that. So, and I'm glad you were talking about lenses, because was the Mozart scene shot entirely by candlelight, or were there artificial lights on there too?
Well, my cameraman for this show was Ronnie Taylor. Ronnie Taylor, BSc. He shot Gandhi.
Wow.
And when I showed him the location and told him what I wanted to do, he just said, "Oh my God, you want to do what?" And I said, "Ronnie, if it was easy, I'd get anybody to do it. I've got you to do it." And we had, for that scene, hundreds of candles that were lit in the chandeliers, and those were all double and triple wick candles, meaning instead of a single little string, the wick, there's actually a double or triple wick, which burns much brighter.
Okay.
And it also means it burns hotter and faster. And we would have takes that we would have to stop because the candles had melted so much they were dripping on the people down below. But that was part of how you light it. And so, in that scene, in the Mozart scene, there are 14 firefighters in the shot, dressed in the style of Louis XIV.
Wow. Just in case we were all set.
They were all standing around in the scene. They had little, fire extinguishers nearby, but that was how we did it. And then we had these massive fans that would suck the smoke out of this place after a take, because at the end of a take, it was getting hard to see and breathe from all the candles. But Ronnie Taylor had found places to hide lights all around that place. So it's supposed to look like it's candlelit. It's not.
Okay. I remember reading something about Stanley Kubrick making one of his movies, and he had to have a very special lens made.
Barry Lyndon.
Yeah, Barry Lyndon, yeah. And he had to have a particular lens made just for that in order to do it by candlelight. So I wondered if you made special lenses or what you managed to do in order to pull that off. Because it looks beautiful. I mean, it looks like it's candlelight.
Oh, it was a gorgeous shot. I mean, that was just one more challenge in it. But one of the things that's particular to Circlevision, and it goes back to that first thing I was talking about with the way it's sort of set up to film at 50 feet, that if you're shooting outdoors in a bright, sunny landscape, postcard movies, if the lenses are focused on 50 feet, basically everything's in focus from about 5 feet in front of the lens out to infinity, because you've got so much light. And the lens is stopped down so much, you got a lot of depth of field. Well, when you're shooting for other things like Mozart, you're lucky if you can get to, an f4, maybe an f2.8. The focus is really shallow, which means you now need to be able to make sure you can focus very precisely on the subjects. Well, what we did for this film was we created all new lenses. And these lenses could be focused, which meant forget the shims, that's ancient Disney history. Now we had lenses that could actually be, you could grab the lens and say, I want this focused on 8.5 feet, and you could just dial it in like a regular lens.
Nice.
And what we did was we had 4 of the cameras, as I recall, 4 of the cameras had electronic controllers, because those lenses needed to shift focus during that shot.
I was to say, did you rack focus during that? I don't even remember it. But
absolutely.
Oh my God!
And in fact, I was personally racking focus on 2 of the lenses during that shot, because we start in the scene with Mozart playing the harpsichord and with everybody there, and then we go down the hall and totally different focus with a pan, and then back again to see Nine Eye, and then back into the next room, and the focus shifts again, and so we had controllers where we could hit our marks for this needs to go to 4 feet to 8 feet to 20 feet or whatever.
Wow! Oh my God! Yeah,
and all while crawling underneath the camera as it's being dollied down the hallway.
I mean, you blew away Circlevision. I mean, you really.
Oh yeah,
took
yeah.
it.
I mean, here's the funny story about that shot about Mozart. We had been planning what we were going to do. We had scouted the location. We had all these things in mind. And there was a meeting. There were many, multiple meetings over the 2 years that we were in production on this. And we come back to the studio at one point, and we had to make a presentation to Michael Eisner to say, what are we doing, and where are we in the show, and whatever. I had already been considering this one problem of passing a mirror, and Michael Eisner said in front of 50 of his minions. He just said, "Hey, wouldn't it be great if Nine Eye could see herself in the mirror?" It was, this was my worst nightmare. I mean, literally my worst nightmare, because we had thought about this and how you would do it, and would you just put green screen in for the glass, and could you and again, this is early days of computer graphics, and I had done some studies of this and thought, it's impossible. I mean, it would be very, very difficult to do. And so here I am in front of Eisner, and he says, "Hey, wouldn't it be great?" And I went, yeah, that would be great. And before I left the place, I had a solution. It's like the solution came to me, and it was like, oh my God, now we have to pull this off. And my solution was this: when you come down that hallway between the first room where Mozart's playing the harpsichord and down to the other room where there's a bunch of people dancing the minuet, that hallway isn't really a hallway. It was another room. And what we did was we built a wall across that so that it looked like a hallway, and we put in this mirror that's not a mirror. It's a window. And behind that, we put another false wall. And so basically, we were creating a fake mirror.
Yep.
And what that meant was Nine Eye had to be in that other room, that other fake corridor,
right,
and had to be matched in speed as we pass by. Nine Eye sees herself and then comes back and looks again and then goes down the rest of the hallway.
Right.
And what that required was we had to have a Nine Eye model that was on a dolly, that was in the room, and you had to figure out how we were going to sync this all up. And the problem was we were in production probably a year and a half before the show was going to open, in Paris. So they hadn't really built Nine Eye yet. And so, I called up the Disney people and at WDI, and I said, I need an early version of Nine Eye. I don't care if it's a prototype. I need something that will pass for Nine Eye. And they went, well, we haven't built it yet. And I said, I need it, 3 weeks from now or whatever. And they scrambled and they built me a Nine Eye and shipped it to us in Paris so that we could stick it on a camera dolly. And so we had camera dolly grips that were moving the camera down the hallway. And we had more dolly grips inside the false hallway. And they had to synchronize with our camera. As our camera was coming down the hall, Nine Eye had to come out. We had to go past the mirror, then both of us go back, and then again, And so I came up with a way to synchronize these two. When we built the false wall, there's a gap. About an inch. You can't see it, but there's a gap.
Yep.
And then what I did was I put a really high-power flashlight on the front of the camera dolly, aimed at that gap. And what that meant was that the grips inside there, in the dark, could see that beam of light and know that's where the front of the dolly was.
That's brilliant.
And so they just timed themselves to match that. And wherever that beam of light went, they moved their dolly. and hopefully it worked.
So Jeff, while you were explaining that, I went back real quick and looked at the film, and I think the only hint, if you didn't understand how that worked, is that the candles in the mirror, so to speak, are flickering slightly different than the candles on the outside of the mirror. And I think that's the only, because you have two sets of candelabras.
We had the same flower arrangement on both sides, and the only problem was those candles are, you had two sets of candles, so they're going to flicker differently.
I'm so excited because I had a bet with Todd today about how you pulled that off, and that was my guess. So I'm so excited that I got it right.
He's got it.
That one was really challenging, and we had what a first for me, which was double playback. We had to have the sound man playing back the kid playing, and the kid that played Mozart really could play that number on the harpsichord. He's really playing it, but we're doing it to playback, and so we're pumping the sound of the harpsichord in one room, and as we come down the hall, we're pumping the sound in of the string quartet that's playing the minuet in the next room. So synchronizing all of these things was, that was without question as complicated a shot as I've ever done.
Oh yeah, that's amazing. Well, I've got a couple other myths here to see if you can bust these if they're true, because you read things on the internet, but we want to get the facts from the horse's mouth here. So,
well, I did this with the gal who had questions about the beginning of The Shining, and it was like, there were all these myths and ridiculous conspiracy theories. So I took care of that. So I'll help you as much as I can here.
Awesome. Well, the very first scene is not CGI. It's a dinosaur, right? The very first scene where we go back in time. The legend has it that was not CGI, and it was a puppet, audio animatronic, whatever you want to call it. It was a manipulated object, being a dinosaur, that would have been used in other Hollywood movies. Do you know what other movies?
No, that was brand new for our film.
It was brand new for you. Boom! Myth busted. Look at that.
When you go into the world of visual effects and things, and you ask for a T-Rex or something,
yeah,
you're going to get something that's going to look like another film. So, but this was built specifically for us, for our film.
Cool.
Gotcha. Cool.
The background was shot in Palm Springs, and the foreground was shot blue screen.
Oh, okay.
All right. So the next one, we're in the Ice Age, and as Robin Williams calls out, daiquiris for everybody. According to this history here, it was originally created for Magic Carpet Round the World, and
correct.
And they only
shot in the Alps.
Yep.
And it was an outtake because at the time the sun angle was wrong, and the helicopter shadow was on the mountain.
Right.
In the background of the plates. And we looked at it and we just said, oh man, this is so great. This would be perfect. We could use this. And we were dealing with a number of big effects companies at the time on our show. And we handed that to them and said, can you take that camera shadow out of there? And they went, oh yeah, piece of cake.
And look at that. So that one's confirmed. I like that. That's awesome.
Check.
Got that one. All right. Let's move on to Scotland, where you went to Alnwick Castle, and
which was the same castle that was used in the first Harry Potter.
Oh, really? Oh, neat. That's a neat little. Okay, we'll add that to our show notes there.
It's up in Northumberland.
So,
and let me tell you, we scouted a lot of castles.
Says that the battering ram was obviously specifically placed in an area so that it would block non-period items.
False.
False.
No, we was placed a camera for what we wanted. We had complete control. We were in an area where there was the only anachronistic items where we were in that whole vast area was way off in the back cameras. There was a road. Mm-hmm. And there were occasional modern cars that would go by, but we did have traffic control, and they were on walkie-talkies, so we could keep that down to a minimum.
Gotcha.
So no, the battering ram was not hiding anything. But here's where maybe that myth came from. As I had said previously, normal Circlevision shots, you got a maximum of about a 12-foot dolly track before it shows up. and I wanted a longer run for this shot. You know, we had all this production value. I wanted it to, to be there. And so I put in a kind of snaking camera track. There was a dolly track that went around that battering ram, and it was actually quite elevated at the back and back down to ground level by the time it comes to the front. But it sort of went around the battering ram, and the idea was that when you got to the far end of the shot, the back cameras would not see the end of the dolly track because it's behind the battering ram. So in that particular case, it's hiding something. It's hiding part of the track.
But not specific something that was already there on the land. Gotcha.
Right. And in fact, when we did the shot, we got hundreds and hundreds of reenactors that have literally come from all over the British Isles to do this scene, and they show up in their own costumes and with their weapons and everything. Even their women show up in costume, even though they're not going to be in the scene.
Oh, really?
They're all up at the castle dressed as serving wenches. But this is how they do it. We brought them for the weekend, and they all show up to do this. When the time came to, get this all put together, and, it's all been kind of calculated out, I've tried to figure the math on this stuff. And we get to the beginning of the camera shot, and I'm looking, and I can just see a little bit of the track of where we're going to end up. It's just like, I can see like 2.5 feet of track at the beginning of the shot.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, no, okay, Anna, you're dead. Lie here. There's literally a dead guy lying over the track. And as the shot is progressing, the guy, is able to get up and move and go be part of the scene.
That is awesome. Well, so the next two are still on this scene, and one of them has to do with the extras that you cast. The claims that these people were devoted to recreating period battles. They were ecstatic about being with you, that, you had a Hollywood team there. And in fact, when you yelled cut, they kept on fighting.
No, not true. No. But there's a similar one, and I'm going to replace that myth with another one.
Okay.
What we did was, when you do as complicated a shot as that, and there's, if you think of it in rings outward from the camera, there's the stuff that happens within 10 feet of the camera. There's the stuff that happens 20 to 30 feet out from the camera. There's the stuff that's 50 or 100 or 1,000 feet. I mean, you've literally got all the way out to the castle, and you've got stuff happening. And so I sit down with my assistant directors, and we work out the timing on that stuff. And essentially everything works off of a count. You've got, an assistant, I'll call action, and then you've got an assistant director who's got a, megaphone and walkie, and he's calling 1, 2, 3, 4, like that. And so he calls out these counts, and they become kind of the time code of the scene. And so what you will do is as a director is I would work outwards from the camera. I'd spend most of my time making sure that the stuff that's around the camera is all worked out and rehearsed very precisely. Then you got, more people in the next ring, and you'd work that out, and you'd do it counts. You'd say, I want you to be here on 7 and hit him on 8, and then this guy falls and he's down by 9 or whatever. And so those same numbers are applied to everybody. And so as you go further out, you'd say, well, you guys are going to start over here and you're going to rush that group, and don't start to run until 3 and try to get there about 9, or whatever. And so the advantage of this is that as you would rehearse it, you would do it, and the assistant director is doing the counts, and then you'd have this, kind of post-mortem after a rehearsal, and you'd say, okay, here's what's not working. These guys get here too early, so what was their number? Oh, they're starting on 7? Okay, well, make them start on 9, or things like that, where you could just move the start points or end points for these people based on the counts, and very quickly you could dial in a shot.
Wow.
Well, in the course of doing this, we had a bunch of kids, young college-age kids, that I had cast as the farthest way back in the scene. And they were literally going to come from the castle, from the far side of the castle. They were supposed to be townspeople. They were in fairly crude kind of, Middle Ages type outfits, and they got pikes and shovels and, spears. But they're just college kids. And that was like the last group. And the idea was they're, as the battle is ongoing, even the townspeople are getting involved towards the end of the shot. So I've given my assistant director these numbers, and we've worked it all out. And we do a rehearsal, and the kids are somehow, they're down in the battle scene. And it's like, no, wait a minute. They got, how did that happen? They're not qualified to be in the battle. They're just supposed to be coming in at the end, and you go, oh, sorry, I must have given them wrong numbers. And so we shift the numbers. And so we start filming this thing, and over the course of the takes, every time we did it, we kept moving back the number for these townspeople, and every take, they were in the battle. And it was like, what the hell is going on? Well, basically, they just said, you think you can fool us by changing the numbers? We'll just run faster. And so they were racing down to get into the battle every time.
Oh, man. That's amazing.
So I don't know if that's the origin of the myth.
It might be. It might be. Well, I've got another one here for you.
Sure.
We're still at an Elmwood Castle. Now, here's the first one. It says, the show director of the movie, Tom Fitzgerald. Well, we know Tom worked on the show, but he certainly wasn't the director of the movie. That was you.
Tom was my boss.
Yeah, so I mean,
he was like a executive producer.
We'll give this one plausible for now. Needed to supervise the shooting of the scene. He did so by climbing atop of a tower located in the foreground and realized after the shooting was over, his boots were actually visible, although briefly, in the final movie.
I'll give him that one.
They'll give him that one.
Yeah.
So,
well, he was up on the roof of the battering ram, and that's where my AD was.
Look at that. That's funny. So I got to look for his boots next time I try to watch the fuzzy version of it on YouTube.
Yeah.
This one's just my own interest. Is that I assume that the building of the Eiffel Tower, I think I saw some pictures of it, that was actually done a stop animation when they were running through the time period. Is that correct?
Yeah, that was an interesting shot. We actually did the research on how the Eiffel Tower was built, how it went up.
Mm-hmm.
It went up in interesting stages. There was a piece that went up through the middle that was temporary to support it until it got to a certain height, and then that part went away. And so what we did in the case of building the Eiffel Tower was we filmed it in reverse.
Oh.
We had a full version of the Eiffel Tower. It was, I'm guessing, like 3.5, 4 feet tall, and it was in a forced miniature of the rooftops of Paris. So this was actually filmed in reverse, and what they did was it was made out of tin, and they would literally snip it away
Cool.
until it went away. And then what we did is the whole thing was shot with a background that was composited later.
Mm-hmm.
We wanted time-lapse sky going by as the Eiffel Tower is being built. It was an interesting problem of where can you take a Circlevision camera to film time-lapse where nothing is in the shot except sky.
Yeah.
And they found a location for us in Texas. Wow. And they put the camera up on a platform on top of an RV and shot for 3 days of, time-lapse skies. And then we brought that back, and that was composited with the other thing. And if you look at the miniature of Paris was fascinating, because if you were to walk out onto the stage where this thing was set up, it wouldn't look like anything. You would just think, well, this is ridiculous. I mean, where the camera was is maybe 15 feet away from the Eiffel Tower, which is like all the way across Paris. And yet near the camera were, apartments with great detail with, that you could look in the windows with curtains and furniture and things on the wall and stuff like this. But as you went further and further and further away, these models got smaller and smaller and smaller. And they were literally built to the camera angle. So that nobody built anything. You didn't build a single wall that didn't need to be built because it wasn't going to be seen.
Right, because you're never going to pan. You weren't going to do anything. It was just all stationary.
Right, it's a lock-off shot.
That's awesome. That's incredible. All right, I got another one here for you, Jeff, that actually calls you out specifically. Let's go to the Bahamas. The first one is that you were a few miles away from the spot where Walt had filmed 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. True or false?
True.
True. Awesome. Oh, that's cool.
And in fact, one of the people that was our dive master was a fella. Give me a second, and I'll remember his name. Who worked on all the Bond movies, and I think he may have worked on 20,000 Leagues. He's like the guy you go to in the Bahamas for underwater photography.
Right.
Jordan was, fantastic. And he showed me a bunch of locations, and he said, well, we can use this spot, I use this for Thunderball or whatever. And as it happened 2 years earlier, there was a wreck of a ship went down, and that was the ship that we used for filming.
Nice.
That's cool. So the one here was that Imagineers were worried about sending everybody so deep into the ocean, but you apparently didn't hesitate to don a frogman suit in order to swim around the submarine, giving instructions with the use of gestures. And then I didn't understand this last part, just as you had not hesitated for another scene to climb up over the camera many yards above the ground, which I assume might be the Paris exposition scene. So
who is writing this stuff?
I don't know, but that's why we go to the source.
It's rather florid material, but not untrue. Let me try to clarify. I had been a certified diver in the past, and but to do this particular shoot, which was like at 65 feet in depth for the deck of that shipwreck, everybody thought, well, maybe you should be recertified. And so Disney paid for me to take scuba lessons and the whole thing. But as I said, I had been diving and I had done underwater photography previous to that. So I went through that whole process, and I was working with Jordan, and he was terrific. And so what we ended up doing, we found this location, and we said, well, this is where we're going to shoot. Jordan Klein, I knew I'd remember his name, Klein, Kline. And if anybody wants to look him up, he got some great underwater credits. Anyway, so we're gonna do this shoot, and the Circlevision camera to go into an underwater housing is a major operation. I mean, the camera is huge to begin with. It's normally about 350 pounds, just a normal Circlevision shot. And by the time you put it into this massive steel and glass underwater housing, it's probably closer to 600 or 700 pounds. And it requires a full crane on a barge to be able to lower it into the water. So it's a huge deal. So, it's like this, compared to doing a regular Circlevision shot, this is like this multiplication factor of about 10.
Right.
And so we are getting ready to put this camera down on the deck of this shipwreck. It's it was actually a mail boat or something. So it's kind of a freighterish type thing, and we're going to set this down on the deck. And so I've been down there with Jordan. We figured it out. I know exactly where I want it. And he says, okay, I'll go up, get the crew ready. And so we've got a barge, we got the crane, we got the camera, we got a crew. There must have been a half a dozen divers that are helping to bring the camera down. I'm on the deck of the ship, 65 feet down, to tell them where to put it. And so the crew is bringing this thing down, and it's very difficult to move this massive camera, and you're underwater, so everything happens slowly, and they're maneuvering it, and I'm signaling them, and I'm saying, right here, this is the spot, bring it here. And in the course of bringing this thing down to the spot, somebody swiped by me and hit the hose that went from my mouthpiece to my tank. Oh. And that hose popped out. Oh. And it's now, throwing a stream of bubbles straight up.
Right.
And I'm sucking salt water.
Oh.
And I've got 6 or 7 guys around me who are, literally, wrestling this thing to put it on the deck. Well, the signal for I'm out of air is, you do the, hand across the throat, gesture that goes, I'm out of air, I'm out of air. And I don't know what's happened. I can't see the hose that's come loose. And the guys who are maneuvering the camera think that I'm telling them, yeah, right here, this is the spot, put it down.
Jeez.
They're looking at it like, yeah, we get it. This is where you want the camera. And I'm going, I'm getting frantic. And forget all the training. I'm sitting there thinking, do I have enough air to make it to the top? I'm 65 feet down. I'm not going to get to the top. Yeah. And there's some guy who's just a couple of feet away from me, and he looks over at me, and he, my eyeballs must have been saucers at that particular moment. And he looks at me like, why is air bubbling away from you? Whatever. And without thinking, he grabs his mouthpiece and shoves it at me, and I suck on it, and I'm coughing and choking and drinking salt water. And, the thing of, if when you train for scuba diving, you train for not having air. But when you do that, you take a deep breath and hold it. I was in the middle of just breathing, and somebody popped my hose, so I didn't have time to take a breath.
Right.
So it wasn't like it was extremist, let me tell you.
Wow.
And so this guy has now given up his air for me, and he didn't take a breath. So I have to give it back to him, back to me, back to him, back to, so now we're buddy breathing, and the two of us are finally getting sorted out. And somebody writes on I had a slate with a grease pencil. This is how you write underwater. They write on this thing, "Stay here." I was like, what? And all of them leave. The camera's now on the deck of the ship. I'm down below. I'm still kind of, I'm kind of throwing up in my mouthpiece from the salt water, and they leave me, and they all go up. And I'm thinking, what the heck is going on?
Union break.
And and they come back about 10 minutes later, and they bring me a fresh tank. Well, anybody who's a diver will tell you, wait a second, this screws up your dive tables. There are all these things about how much time you spend underwater and at what depth for how long.
Right.
Well, they don't have anything on the dive tables that says, and here's where somebody brings you a fresh tank. I was like, so I don't know what the hell is going on, but I put the tank on and we finished setting, lining up the shot and whatever. And the next day we were able to get it. But that was a pretty close call.
Wow.
And to operate the Circlevision camera, you basically have to be floating above it. I'm kind of swimming where I'm holding on to it with my feet straight up, so I can look at the controls for the camera on the roof of the Circlevision rig, the underwater rig. And, of course, I've got Michel Piccoli, the actor, who's in full makeup and wardrobe, in this submersible that's approaching the camera, and he's supposed to be acting. And so as I'm trying to give him directions, I would swim over to the sub and write something on a slate and hold it up at the glass so he could read it. So, yeah, that was kind of what was going on.
Wow.
I don't know if that fits into your
no, it does. I mean,
mythology or not, but
yeah. And what was it says other scene climb up over the camera many yards. That must have been the Paris.
When we did the shot where the camera goes up over the billboard in at the expo.
Yeah.
I had a little cage-like thing built on top of the camera, and I was up there so that I was flying with the camera. In this particular case, I could fly above with the camera.
Gotcha. All right. The last one I have here is that I'm really interested. Obviously, this portion did not make it to the U.S. version of the film, but this is what we're referring to for those listening is the scene in Red Square in Moscow.
Right.
I'd love to learn a little bit about that, but the myth here was that a couple of them here, we were the first Westerners ever authorized to film on location. The Red Army ensured that the evacuated surroundings were secure, which caused some surprise among Moscow citizens. And as soon as those citizens saw Mickey's ears on Air Force One airship, They figured out what was going on and burst out with deafening applause at this surprise symbol of peace. So,
why should I spoil that myth?
I thought you were bringing peace, love, harmony, and an end to the Cold War. I thought that you were part of that.
Yeah,
So.
well, there's some interesting stories from that shoot. Basically, what happened was the aerial coordinator for this was Mark Wolf. Mark Wolf did some of the helicopter shots for the film, and he does all the big movies. You'll see his name in credits for helicopter work. If it's a big film, Mark Wolf probably worked on it. Anyway, Mark, great guy. He had worked on a number of films with me and the producers, and he had arranged for all those balloons to come to Red Square, and they had to be tethered. They had to be tied off because for Circlevision, you got that 30-degree vertical north and south of what you see. It's not just 360. You've got this band of picture. And so you want the balloons to be in that area. And if the camera's up off the ground, we were on a cherry picker, and we were probably 30 feet in the air. So you want the balloons at the appropriate height so that you can see them.
Right.
You don't want to just see the basket or something. And so what we did was we got the Russian army to come in, and this local unit that came in, and we used their trucks to tie off the balloons. They were basically the boat anchors for all the balloons, and they were wonderful. We had a great time with them. We were filming in Red Square for a week or so, and we had a little wrap party. We would have a wrap party every time we'd leave a country. And, the Russians were just sobbing and drunk and throwing their arms around us and, oh, Tavarish, and it was just really, really emotional. We had a great time. As it turns out, a couple of weeks later, there was a revolution in Russia. This was the Russian White House that was surrounded, and Boris Yeltsin was on the steps with a megaphone, and there was an army unit that protected him. It was our guys.
Oh, wow.
The same guys that had been in Red Square and I know this because they had given us their badges and their little banners from their unit. And, you look it up, they're the same guys. They protected Boris Yeltsin and prevented a Russian revolution.
Whoa.
There we go. So there was crowds cheering and everything, but it was a different time.
Yeah.
So interesting thing is that scene, and then where they accidentally pick up two people getting married and they need to get to Paris, and then he appears at the airport and there's a cameo appearance by who was it, Hal?
Gérard Depardieu.
Yes.
If I said his name correctly.
You said his name perfectly. And I have to tell you, the day that we filmed that, where Gérard Depardieu was playing a baggage handler.
Yeah.
Not a single person got their luggage at Charles de Gaulle Airport that day because every baggage handler at Charles de Gaulle Airport wanted to come around and see Depardieu playing a baggage handler.
That's funny.
And we actually had a guest in the middle of the filming who had stopped by, who was someone that just was curious about what we were doing, and he was into various film technologies and so forth. And he came up to me and said, "Do you mind if I watch?" It was Roman Polanski. And he said, "Is there some place I could be that I could, what?" And so I put him. He's actually in the scene in one of the trucks that's in the scene. Roman Polanski's sitting in the front row where he could watch. Yeah.
That is hilarious. That was
a fun scene to film. We had all kinds of problems. The airport didn't want to give us a 747. They didn't want to give us the Concorde. My producer, who's a Frenchman, said, "Well, then, okay, we're going to get a Concorde from British Airways." And it was like, okay. And they rolled a Concorde in there. And I'll tell you, that was a weird experience for me because they said, "Okay, the Concorde's coming. Where do you want it?" And
where do you want the giant jet?
Yeah. And so I'm literally standing out there with two orange cones going this way, right here, come here. I'm directing a Concorde into the shot. That was pretty weird.
Oh.
Now, do you have any knowledge of why that scene? Did you shoot it for American audience as well, or was that whole scene with Gerard just left in there because he's a Frenchman and What were the reasons for both the red square and that scene being taken out of the film? Do you know?
The red square thing, I think, was a timing issue, but it was also because the wedding couple ends up at Charles de Gaulle Airport as well.
Okay,
and so it was like, if you're going to take the airport scene out, you kind of have to take out the other part.
Right.
And the issue, as I recall it, I mean, this is a long time ago, the issue, as I recall it, was the fact that it said Air France on the side of the Concorde. And Renault Automobiles was paying for the film. They were, paying millions of dollars for the film and the rights to, put their name on the theater and all of that. And it was sort of like, and Air France gets a free plug in the middle of the film. But, there aren't any Concordes that don't have names on them. I mean, we talked about, masking it off, and we went through all kinds of things. We surveyed a location in Miami for doing an American version of the airport scene, and that came to nothing.
Interesting. So you never shot the English version over there?
No. Well, everything got shot two versions.
Okay.
French and English.
That's interesting. So even though you did have it, it could have been done. And then Renault never sponsored the attraction here, so it was almost a moot point. We should have an Eastern Airlines Concorde. That would have been really appropriate, right? So the last scene, is funny. There was a quote that we found in a magazine, Disney News magazine, and let me just find it here, that we found today. And at the very end, the timekeeper picks a lucky family from the audience that's chosen to accompany Nine Eyes on a dazzling view of the future. Obviously, nobody was ever picked. It was always the same family, and we probably think this is just marketing hype in the magazine. Two questions there. Is that certainly true? And second, did you film the family, because they look a little more like video to me? So that's just
we did film the family, and for the hologram. They get kind of converted to a hologram before they show up in the film itself.
Right.
Let me back up. The footage of the Renault car in the future Paris.
Yep.
Was a tremendously expensive and time-consuming shot. That one shot was over $1 million. Wow! And it took the better part of a year to produce that shot. It was just to do a 360-degree computer graphics shot at 30 frames per second. I remember sitting at Rhythm and Hughes, the company that did it, and as we were talking about the bid for this thing, somebody was running the numbers, and the guy says, according to me, we should have started rendering this, a month ago. And, it was very, very complicated and very expensive, but they did a fantastic job on that. But the car element that has the family in it rises up into the shot and then flies off and goes through the Eiffel Tower.
Right.
And we knew that there was a very high likelihood that the film was going to play in Japan. And so we deliberately picked an audience of characters that were supposedly picked from the audience who had dark hair that maybe could pass in the film shot as Japanese.
Right. Because you really don't see them very
well. The idea
was
that we had a family for the French version of the film that had dark hair, that was for the hologram, and with the idea that when and if it ever went to Japan, that would be a Japanese family in the same clothing with the same dark hair.
Gotcha.
But it would still be the same puppet in the car,
right?
Stop motion animated to be flying away through that.
Oh wow!
So Todd, just for your reference,
yes,
$1 million in 1991. Is $1.85 million now.
There we go for just a few seconds.
Yeah, there's your inflation calculator.
So Jeff, that was the CGI was the whole 360 spin, but you didn't do it. There was no photography. That was all CG people as well.
Well, there's actually a shot for that. There's two shots. There's one shot that was taken from the roof of the Arc de Triomphe. And we shot that as a 360.
Okay.
And then Rhythm and Hughes took it, and then they made it. They did all their computer graphics stuff to make it look like the future, And it's in that shot that the car rises up,
Yep.
and you see the family, and then you start to fly towards the Eiffel Tower, which you see in the distance. Then we cut, and now we're flying with them, and we go through the Eiffel Tower ourselves. That shot, the second shot through the Eiffel Tower, that's a full 360 computer graphics rendered image.
Gotcha.
Whereas the first one was elements added to a 360 shot. We gave them the background plate that they used.
Right.
And
so the family was all animated at that point. The only real live actors were the ones in the pop-up, in the hologram. And is it true that Sid Mead was who had worked on Tron, helped develop that last part of the film?
Yes, absolutely. Sid Mead is he's a futurist. He had these wonderful designs with these light beams and things that he gave us these sketches, and then Rhythm and Hughes created them to Sid Mead's specifications. So yeah, and I think he worked on Blade Runner.
Actually, so that brings me to so I'd always heard the story that the end of Blade Runner picked up some helicopter shots from that potentially you had shot from The Shining when they did the second edit and did Deckard's voiceover. Sir. All right, so that was you on both of those then. That's awesome.
That is me on both ends of that. Yeah. What happened was when we were shooting for The Shining, I had done lots of helicopter stuff for McGillivray Freeman at that time, but we were shooting in Montana and sending the footage directly back to England for developing. We never saw the footage. We would just send raw dailies straight back to Stanley Kubrick, and he would just say, keep shooting. So, but I was used to doing films for our library for McGillivray Freeman, where in between takes, waiting for the car to come back to the number one position, whatever. And I would sort of drift off and shoot stuff.
Oh, gotcha. Yeah.
It was just pretty pictures. And it was, where the car wasn't in it. Well, our directive from Stanley was, we're shooting the car. The car is the thing. And every shot has the car in it going up to the hotel. But I would go off and shoot these other scenics. And, I guess I'd been under the impression that, maybe one day we could get our hands on that footage and put it in the library. Well, it ended up in the library at Warner Brothers. And somehow somebody mentioned to, the people on Blade Runner that, hey, we got some footage. Maybe you can use it. So I didn't know until I saw the film when it first came out.
You were sitting there in the audience, you're like, wait a minute, that's mine.
Yeah.
That's fantastic.
Oh, man.
Okay, a couple so first of all, I want to say, the more we go into this, it's like, I cannot believe that this movie got made. I mean...
Yeah, it's unbelievable. The amount of money and...
So much work and effort.
Well, I did some prep. I went through... I keep a daily journal, and I've been doing it for, almost 40 years of keeping a journal. And so as preparation for this, I thought, well, I better go through, everything from 1990 and 91 and get my ducks in order here. As I read through it on a day-by-day basis, I agree with you. I don't have any idea how this movie got made. I mean, we had all the regular problems that you have making a movie, but then all the Circlevision stuff on top of it. It's like, wow. How did we ever finish?
And you said you were trying to time what you were filming to what was going to go on in theater. So did you have sort of was there a little, you mentioned like if you went a second over on one side, you would be able to like pick up a second somewhere else or drop a second somewhere else in order to match it up. So right. I'm assuming you had since you wrote the script, like you had the entire show scripted at the beginning when you went out to shoot.
It was, it was changing all the time. We would, they would bring in writers, and they'd say, hey, we've got this great idea. And there would be, completely impossible things to do in Circlevision. It would be, thank you very much. And we'd go back to our original script. And they were constantly trying to, throw people at it to improve the script. But by the time we were actually in production, we had these windows that said, the bobsled shot can only be this long. It's got to fit. It's all got to, get together.
Right.
And so, as we were editing, we would keep making adjustments to the overall master list of timing. And that couldn't change.
So I find that really interesting because I thought when you were talking about timing, Jeff, that the time travel sequences of going through the purple and blue tunnels would allow you some leeway because you could crop off a couple frames on either end of those and get yourself back in sync if your shots. But it sounds like Disney said, nope, you know what? This sequence here is going to be 5 seconds and that's all you got. So we're not going to give you a frame.
As it turns out, those little time travel segments that you're talking about were all different lengths. They kept getting shorter and shorter and shorter. In other words, the first time it happens, you need an audience to be able to look around and wonder and go, oh, wow, cool, we must be going through time. And, by the time you get to late in the show, you just want a little taste of that. And you go, oh, yeah, that time travel thing.
How that's just like Mission to Mars when they put you in sleep mode in the very beginning. It's very long, and when you're coming back, they're like, "Forget it, we're gonna just do this for 4 seconds."
And we're back.
And the sound is just too annoying anyway. The other thing, Jeff, that I wanted to comment on, which was really neat, and I don't know if this was purposeful, but when you are traveling through present day, what was really neat is that you took note that when you were in Europe, it was daylight, and when you came to New York, it was nighttime. So as if it was the rise of the morning in Europe, and that, I mean, those are just those tiny, tiny little things. And one question on New York was that the Williamsburg Bridge or the Brooklyn Bridge? To me, it looked like the Williamsburg, based on where the Twin Towers were.
I'll tell you how that came about. That was not shot for the movie. That was the way we do helicopter shots in Circlevision, and I say this in a kind of a general way. We have helicopter mounts that go underneath the helicopter, below the skids, so you can't see the helicopter, but that thing is hanging down well below the helicopter, which means you can't land. So what we do is we have these helicopter landing platforms that are, 4 or 5 feet tall. And the pilot would have to, when he's coming back from filming, would have to land with that rig coming in between those platforms, and then he'd set it down. And then the rig would be, a foot off the ground. And conversely, if you're getting ready to go off, he has to now lift up out of those platforms and then go off to do the filming. That was generally how helicopter stuff was done. When it was done for America the Beautiful, they didn't have helicopter shot. In that, it's a B-25.
Oh, wow.
And they had a rig that would go in the belly, in the bomb bay of a B-25, like a big arm, and it would swing down 90 degrees so that it was down low enough that you wouldn't see the plane, but then they could fly wherever a B-25 could go, and that was what they did for aerials in those days. And so on the China film, I had to find a helicopter in China that we could also find in America so that we could build a rig for it.
Oh, God.
And I found in China, it was a Messerschmitt, the BO-105, and we got one in America and built a rig that would fit that, so we knew when we took it to China, it would fit the Chinese thing. But we've done this all over the earth, literally, filming aerial shots in Circlevision. But somebody had come up with a plan for a new rig, and basically picture a helicopter, regular helicopter, with really long legs. That, I mean, just, like you practically need a ladder to get into the helicopter. But the idea was that these legs could pivot up and out of the way. Okay. And that means no platforms. This helicopter would take off and land normally on these spindly legs, but as soon as you'd get airborne, you could rotate the legs up out of the shot, get your shot, fly around, whatever, come back, put the legs down, and you'd land. That was the idea. And it worked on paper. And I got voted to be the sucker who went to New York to test this by shooting some footage. And I took off and I thought, well, let's do some night shots. Because here's the thing. The normal helicopter rig for Circlevision is forbidden to fly over cities. You can't fly over people with this because it's what they call a jettisonable load. If you had a problem, and you're flying this helicopter with this thing hanging underneath. If you were in trouble, you need to be able to cut that thing loose. You need to, pull the switch and it drops. And, the only time that ever happened, I think, was once up in northern Canada. Somebody jettisoned the thing from about 5 feet into a snowdrift. It was like, dump it and not hurt the camera. But what it meant was that from an FAA standpoint, you could never fly over a city with a jettisonable load. Okay, so the idea with the spindly leg rig, there's no jettisonable rig because that thing is actually physically, bonded to the bottom of the helicopter now, the camera. Right. You can't jettison it. So what that meant was with this crazy rig, you could fly over a city. Well, why not fly over New York? If you're going to shoot some footage, get some footage in New York that you cannot otherwise get.
Right.
So I went and shot, a couple of loads of film. We went over Central Park and whatever, and I shot some night stuff, and I cannot for the life of me remember which bridge that is. If somebody stuck a gun to my head, I'd say it was the Brooklyn Bridge, but there you go.
Yeah, I was looking at Google Maps, and I think because of where the World Trade Center is in the distance, I believe it's the Williamsburg. So,
anyway.
The other,
but the point was that we tried that, and it was a horrible rig. It didn't work, and it was never ever used again. And that footage went into the vault, and just like the ending of Blade Runner, it was one of these things where we're doing the other version of the film, and it was like, do we have any shots of New York? I was like, oh yeah, I know this. And so we pulled that out, and that was it.
That's cool.
That's how it got in the film.
That's awesome.
Cool. Interesting.
So, as a director, were you involved with the casting at all, or was that up to somebody else?
For the Timekeeper show?
Yeah.
I got a vote.
Okay.
But the nature of a show like this is that the studio says, "Hey, we can get you Gerard Depardieu. Are you interested? Where would you use him?"
Baggage handler.
Yeah, he's my baggage handler. Yeah. Great, thanks. And I did a regular casting for Jules Verne, in the standard way, and we had a number of French actors come in, and it was a kind of a mutual decision. At no point was it my decision alone. But I definitely had a voice in casting.
Yeah, I'm fascinated because Jeremy Irons' career up until that point, I mean, he's coming off of Dead Ringers, and then the Kafka film, and it's such a big jump from like those two things to Disney, because this is before Lion King and before he became sort of like a staple Disney actor. So I wondered how he ended up potentially getting involved.
Well, Jeremy Irons was one of the most wonderful people in the world to work with. Couldn't have been nicer. And we had a great time, had a lovely time on the show with him. And, you have some dinners at night and, long talks. And he'd always wanted to do a comedy.
Oh.
And nobody would ask him to do a comedy. Yeah. And I had said, geez, you do all this really dark stuff.
Right. That was his reputation at that point.
Ringer.
Yeah.
And, when you meet an actor like that and you're trying to, soften him up for working with him for a film, you talk about about past work and what he's done and so on. And it was kind of interesting because I asked him about Dead Ringers. I said, geez, I thought it was a terrific performance. I said, it seems to me that most people would have gone into that and said, well, okay, when I play this twin, he'll have a twitch and walk with a limp. And whereas the other guy doesn't, or, and has red hair or something.
Yeah.
But I said, but you didn't do that. And you always knew which twin you were seeing him play. And he said, that's a kind of an interesting point you bring up. He said, we shot for a week and, one of the twins had a limp. And it was like, no, wait a minute. Let's just do this internally, psychologically, and let the audience figure out which is which. And so he was wonderful to work with. When he came in, we did a couple of pages of research for him on H.G. Wells. And I've worked with English actors before, and English actors, whether it's for the movies or stage, first of all, they do both. You're not just a stage actor or a movie actor or TV actor. You do all of those things if you're going to have a career as an actor in England. In England, when you look at a character, you kind of need to know, well, where did he go to school? I mean, you don't ask that question of Americans in American roles. It almost doesn't matter where they went to school. And it means so much to an English actor. Oh, he went to Eton. Oh, he went to Cambridge. Oh, well then, suddenly it's like, got it. I know this guy now because of where he went to school. And so we gave him that information, and so he just kind of just glommed right onto H.G. Wells. He was wonderful to work with.
Oh, good. Cool.
I've got a couple last questions for you, and I forgot to ask these for you early on the train. So I know that you had a simulated nose cone of the TGV made for Jules Verne to be attached to, and you had a locomotive behind it. And that really, you could have done that on a very straight street, but to actually go to Alsace, I believe it was, or wherever it was, and put a train and get a locomotive and get a train crew and reserve the track time and whatever you want to call it. That's amazing dedication. Now, I assume they crafted the nose cone. It wasn't something that the France Railway just had lying around.
Actually, it was a real one that the French Railways had lying around.
Oh my God! You told me you built the other stuff earlier. I'm like, oh, they built this thing too. They built 9i. They have an extra nose cone. How crazy that! So the helicopter shot with Jules Verne strapped to the front, where you actually see him. Obviously dummy at that point. You're not going to do that.
No, actually, it's a real person.
No way. That's a real guy?
That's a real guy.
I should just
He
shut
was
up.
one of our French grips.
Really?
He was about the same size as Jules Verne, and we put a beard and a wig on him, and he said, yeah, sure, why not? And we had built, what you can't see is that there's like a bicycle seat that we built into the real TGV, and he's actually on the front of the train.
I never would have thought that anybody, and today's insurance world, that never would have been allowed.
Yeah, well,
that is.
We had all those insurance people looking the other way.
Well, I just as we were talking tonight, I did a search for something and I stumbled across the short vignette here. It's a 9-minute film that somebody uploaded, the making from time to time. With you're in it. You're at the very beginning in front of the train. So I haven't watched it and listened to it. So maybe it's exposed in there. But do you know the history of this little short film, the making of From Time to Time?
Well, almost everywhere we went, going back to the China film, we would always shoot leftover footage in a regular 35 millimeter movie camera and just shoot some behind the scenes stuff.
Oh, nice.
Okay.
So we had like a regular Airflex, and if we had short ends, we would just throw that up in the thing and just shoot a little making of type stuff.
Sure.
Keep in mind, in those days, it really wasn't done. It was pretty rare. Unlike today, when there are whole productions that are just about the making of.
Sure.
And in those days, it was just let's shoot some stuff. Let's get some extra footage here. And so we'd always been doing that on all of our shows. We always shot extra material, background. There was never a specific use for it. It was just, throw it in the ball.
You know this little 9-minute piece I'm speaking of? Have you seen it?
I probably saw it. I probably shot some of it, but I can't specifically tell you what it was. I know that there was a fair amount of stuff shot during our expo scenes.
Yep.
You could see the rig that I was flying around in.
Well, I'll tell you, 20 seconds into it, you're on camera with your, it looks like I'm trying to see what kind of Navy hat it is that you've got on, the USS Saratoga. It looks like.
I lost that damn hat doing the train shot.
Oh, no.
And that was my favorite hat because I had filmed on the Saratoga for American Journeys, and I was so upset that I had lost that hat. It just flew off in Alsace somewhere. And after that, Antoine, my producer, he got me another hat, a different Navy hat, but it's not the same thing.
Not the same one. Well, I just sent you the link to the film, so you can take a look at that little.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, you can take a look at it. So I'll tell you, Jeff, I could talk all night about film. I think we do have to end it at some point here. But
you did talk all night about film. Todd.
We did. It is officially overnight. Yeah, it's now 10 after 12 here. So we've certainly gone through.
I just want to say, just the level of detail and planning that went into this film, to me, it just blew me away. Even a very small thing, like I noticed watching the film probably third or fourth time through that H.G. Wells is holding a model of a air device or flying machine, and then at the end of the movie it's like he's actually in that one. So it's
the exact same design.
Yeah,
correct.
So,
very good.
I mean, I have to say just how incredibly impressive just all of the planning was. The film sort of ended up having, I know there's the Time magazine thing. It's like there's a little bit of a reputation that it wasn't the most popular attraction, but it's from start to finish, it was fantastic. It ran for 17 years. I mean, you got Robin Williams and a whole bunch of people, for the American it was a great show. It really, really was. And I think if people have anything negative to say about it, it's like they really needed to go in and experience it firsthand, because it was tremendously entertaining from start to finish.
I appreciate hearing that after all these years. It was, I had a lot of pride in that particular show. I'll tell you one real quick story, just really fast. We had gone to the premiere of the opening of Euro Disneyland, now called Disneyland Paris, and I had been hanging out outside the near the exits of the theater. And I would, there were people coming through, but it wasn't open to the public yet. These were people who were on special tour, people who were friends of Disney, whatever, VIPs that were seeing the film. And as I'm sitting there, this older gentleman comes out. He's talking to some little hostess, one of these, local French gals who she's barely 18 years old, and he's asking her questions, and she doesn't speak all that much English, and she can't answer any of his questions. But I can hear the questions, and he's going, well, now this scene, was that green screen or was that blue screen? And was this a miniature? And she's, she's going, I don't know. And he's growing frustrated. And I just stepped up and I said, maybe I can answer a few questions for you. And he goes, oh, great. He says, I'm just full of all these questions of what I've just seen. So I'm standing there for a half an hour, filling this guy in on, this was a miniature, but filmed backwards or whatever. And he's just sucking it all in. And he's going, oh, I thought so. I suspected that. And, oh, that's really great. And was that a computer? Okay, great. And so we're done. He's got to move on. The hostess is taking him away. And she says, come on, we have to go now. And he says, thank you so much. And so he asked my name, and I told him. And I said, and what was your name, sir? And he goes, Ray Harryhausen.
Oh.
And I nearly fell over dead. I was just, and now he's walking away, and I'm going, oh my God, I'm explaining my film, all my visual effects to Ray Harryhausen. Unbelievable.
That's amazing. Oh man. Well, Jeff, it has been an absolute pleasure talking to you this evening. I really super appreciate your time here. And like I said, I will definitely have to chat again, but this has been fabulous.
There's lots of other films,
Oh yeah, I think we could go on, talk about China and talk about your other films and all sorts of stuff you do. So Jeff, thank you very much for sitting in with us tonight again. It's been fabulous. Guys, any further questions before we say good night to Jeff?
Yeah, my friend Lindsay from Canada wanted me to ask him a question.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah, she wanted to know what is his favorite province in Canada and why is it Nova Scotia? She won't believe I asked that question because it was completely
I was just in Nova Scotia in October. It's fantastic. I love Nova Scotia. We'll
put one in the Nova Scotia column then.
I'm going to have to check our listeners out there too on our map to see how many people we have listening from the Atlantic time zone. So
yeah, there you go.
Well, Jeff, again, thank you very much for joining us. And with that, Brian, take us out.
Follow the Lake Buena Vista Historical Society on Twitter and Instagram at LBV History and on the web at lbvhistory.org. Follow Todd McCartney and Retro WDW on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at Retro WDW. For all things Retro Disney World, including exclusive merchandise, visit us on the web at retrowdw.com. On Twitter, follow our web designer Jason Bartel of Deepwater Studios at JasonDWS, our announcer Andre Gardner at Andre Gardner, and follow our hosts Hal Bowers on Twitter and Instagram at GoAwayGreen, and on the web at kingdomofmemories.com. For JT Kujar on Twitter at LS1JT, on YouTube at Rubber City Motoring, and on the web at rubbercitymotoring.com. And you can find me on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Brian P. Miles. Retro Disney World is the monthly podcast of the Lake Buena Vista Historical Society, a nonprofit, nonpartisan, tax-exempt 501c3 organization, and is not affiliated in any way with the Walt Disney Corporation or any of its subsidiary or affiliated entities.
You're still here? It's over. Go home. Go.